Hey there, so today we're going to talk about some ink techniques using India ink. The brand I kind of like to use is Dr. Martens. I find that it handles well. It has a nice solid black color. And when I'm working, sometimes I like to keep my stuff in a jar like this because then you can see everything you need and they're not rolling around or off your table. So that's why I have my stuff in this. And then this is the nib holder for using your ink. This is the Speedball size B. And the cool thing about these is you can adjust the size. And so the two sizes that we're ordering for this class are these two. This is a Quill. This is a little bit of a smaller tip. And they have this curved edge that just fits right in, so you can use it. And they're interchangeable. Now today I'm going to use the finer one in this new holder. And I have this larger one in my older holder. So as you work, I always like to keep a paper towel handy when I'm using wet media just to clean up spills. And I have water because we are going to be using a brush with the ink as well. Now, the super cool thing about India ink is as you're using it, it responds to water. So it can be watered down, applied as a wash, but then once it dries, it's permanent. So you can come back on top of it with watercolor or leaving it just black and white. So it's a versatile media that's kind of fun to work with. So as we're going to get started here, I have two pieces of illustration board, and I'm going to be doing some tests just on this smaller piece. This is Canson illustration board, and this is Crescent. Crescent is a little thinner. My demos where I showed you guys how to cut the illustration board was actually done with the Crescent. So it's a little easier to cut because it's a tiny bit thinner. The Canson is thicker in width and a little bit higher quality. It's a tiny bit more expensive, but not that much. So I recommend, if you guys can, to try to go for the Canson. The way it responds to ink is really nice, but Crescent does work as well. So part of your assignment is to do some experimentation. And it's just getting used to using the ink. So the Dr. Martens brand comes with this little eyedropper. So if you wanted to put it, if you wanted for some reason, well actually we'll use this today for our washes and maybe our brush work because it's easier to see what's happening. And you can just drop a little into your palette. So that's better for brushes, but for the ink pen, I kind of like to dip right in to the jar itself. And you're just going to dip it in there. And the great thing about these ink pens is they respond to pressure. So you can, as you begin to work, light pressure, let's get some more ink on there, will give you a fine line, but deeper pressure opens the two prongs at the end of the pen so more ink is able to flow out. And so as you guys experiment, just get a feel for how the ink pen responds to different pressure, curved lines. It's a tiny bit harder to control than, say, a micron pen, but you can also just get some wonderful techniques that you can't otherwise get with a regular marker type ink pen. The other super cool thing about working with an ink pen, okay, so it's just running out, is you can come in with a brush in your palette here and fill in areas much more quickly. So especially for our graphic project where you're going to have some flat shapes happening, it's a nice option. So rather than with a micron pen, scribble, scribble forever, you can come in with ink and fill in really nicely. And the Dr. Martens ink goes on very smooth and very solid. And you will only need to do one layer to get a nice flat black. As you're working with your brushes and ink, you do want to have water close by because you want to just get that ink out of your brush right away. It will harden into your brush and you don't want to end up ruining your watercolor brushes with ink. So for a temporary clean, we'll just do a little water, and then at the end I'm going to show you this wonderful soap here. So as I was saying, so that is this this larger tip. You can get a little bit of a thicker line. You can vary the pressure as you're going. And this illustration board really responds well to it. Now for this finer tip, so let's get this one out of here. And even with your nibs, you can do a dip into the water. Just kind of clean that off so you're not having ink dry in your nibs. If you let the ink dry, it can cause the two prongs to kind of get glued together with hardened ink, and you don't want that to happen. Now with this finer tip, same. So if you want to come in with smaller details, just as the different tips of your micron pens. This also responds to pressure. And as you can see, it's a little bit of a finer line. And a little bit more control. So for shading, things like that, this tip is great. And then as far as brushwork goes, you can paint with a brush just same as with the nib. Takes a little more control, and you're going to obviously get thicker, more organic lines with a brush and a painterly approach. Again, as you can see, the ink goes on really beautifully, and you want to use a very fine brush if you want to do fine lines, like so. Now, the other cool thing about ink is similar to watercolor. You can do blooms and bleeds. So I'm going to put a little water on my board, and then you can come in with your ink and drop it in to get a bloom effect, and the ink will only go as far as where you've put the water, and you can let the ink do what you cannot get with a pen. So you can get some really wonderful bleed effects, washy effects. So there's straight ink into water. You can also do washes. So we're going to make another pool here and add just a little bit of ink to this and get some grays, then come in with pure ink and experiment a little just with different concentrations of ink as you're going, maybe adding a little more water to this to pull it out. So you guys might find you want a very crisp, clean, solid line, and so working more like this. But there might be areas on your pieces where you want to experiment a little with washes or gray tones. And so using the watered down ink to get those variations is another great way to work. And I'll come over some of these lines here. And as you can see, once they dry, they don't respond to water. So they become water resistant once it dries. So that's why I want you guys to play a little and experiment with the ink while it's wet and how you can get it to respond to water while it's still wet, and then, and then coming over once the ink is dry, again, totally permanent once it dries. Now, once you're all done, you do a quick rinse on your brushes. And then, I can't show you this right now because I don't have a sink by me, but this is my favorite brush cleaner. And all you would do is run your brush under a little water. I'll show you here, and you just reactivate the soap a little, and it's going to remove any residue of ink from your brushes or paint or whatever you're working with, and then you can just kind of rub it in your hand and rinse, and it also preserves your brushes. You want to take care of your brushes because they are replaceable, but especially if you invest in more expensive brushes, you don't want to have to be replacing them more often than not. So this is a great product, this Masters Brush Cleaner. And then cleaning nibs, you can dip your nib in a little bit of water. And then this doesn't have to be cleaned with soap. And just clean as much of that ink off as you can with a paper towel. And when storing them, you're going to want to store your nibs out of the holder. The reason being is there's this little crevice here that holds the nib, can store a little bit of water, and I've found that when I keep my nibs in the holder, they can rust a little bit on the bottom and even get stuck. And so when you're done working with your ink, the best plan is to just take it out of your holder, make sure your nib is totally dry to store. And then if you keep your little box that they come in or wherever you want to store them, and that'll keep them working and in a good state for the longest. So one more technique is spraying. So I have this funky old toothbrush here, and I'm actually gonna give myself some coverage here so I don't spray my table. And I'm using my watered down ink, but holding your brush close to the board, you can kind of get some fun effects, spray effects like so. And depending on what you're going for and the feel of your piece, if that lends to the feel you're going for, that's also kind of a fun thing you can do with ink to get it to do spray techniques. So I hope you enjoyed that ink demonstration.